welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 256, and today's date is January 6, 2014. And the title of this episode is, Are Military Leaders Planning to Replace the U.S. Government? And there is one military officer who is gathering up many other military officers and gathering millions of people, and his answer is yes, it is time to replace the U.S. government. It is time to march on D.C., and these are the plans that are going forth. He has broken this down into 3 phases, and we will discuss this a little later in this report, but let's get into the economic collapse news. We are going to go out to the UK, and as I reported in many reports, that the UK people are in dire straits. They are going into their savings to make ends meet, and right now utility companies have raised their prices around 18%, and they're telling those people, listen, if you can't afford the higher rates, what you need to do is you need to start sharing showers, you need to go without hot drinks, turn off the TV and play board games instead, cook your food using the microwave instead of cooking real food, and go to bed early 2 nights in a week to stay warm. And this is what they are telling the people to do. It reminds me of going back into the time when the people had rotten food back in the 1800s, and they tell the people, well, eat the rotten food because that's all you're going to get. Well, here we are, present day. They're telling the people, listen, this is the way it is. Do your best because we can't help you, and we're just going to keep raising the rates. Now here in the U.S., of course, there's an illusion. People really don't know what's going on here because, of course, they're looking at the stock market, which is the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, and they see this, moving up. They see the unemployment coming down. But what we're seeing is that the new order index since July 2009, after 52 consecutive months of growth, has now started to contract. And this goes on to say that sales dipped and new orders plunged to a 4-year low. A measure of new orders plummeted 7 points to 49.4. And we understand what is going on here. During the months of November, December, all these manufacturers, the auto manufacturers, retail, they were all channel stuffing, pushing the inventory to the stores, to the dealerships, so it looks like they are producing. And what the retail stores and the auto manufacturers are doing is that they're holding all of this merchandise right now. And what are they going to do with it? Because unemployment is very, very high. Yes, they say it's 7%, but if we look at the manipulated calculation and we go previous to before they manipulated in 1994, we can say that unemployment is around 25%. Some places have it at 30%. And again, I always use the common sense notion that if unemployment is actually coming down, we should see incredible retail sales because unemployment is 8% lower than it was last year, but everyone is reporting that sales are worse. It doesn't make sense because we have to remember they count part-time work as full-time employed. Those people who fall off of unemployment benefits are counted as nothing, like they found a job. So they just take them off of it and they don't even count them. And there's millions of people who have fallen off and they're not counted anymore. Just like the 1.3 million who are receiving the extended unemployment benefits, they have fallen off right now. So the next report that comes out, we should see a decline in unemployment because what happened was they fell off the counter and no one's looking at them, and they're reporting it as they've given up. But if there are no jobs to get, how could you give up? You could still be sending out resumes, and I know a lot of people that are continually sending resumes out, and they've been unemployed now 6 months, and they are getting nothing back. Of course, they're trying to find work making the same salary. They have now started to apply to those that have less salary, and even some have applied to part-time work. But of course, one person was telling me they went in and they said, if you find something better, you're going to leave, and this is why we're not offering you the job. And we can see what is happening here. There just aren't jobs at this point. Now, China right now is selling off American debt. We understand this, but Dr. Oded Shenkar reports that China is selling off the debt gradually, because if they were going to do it too fast, it would be a problem. And he went on to say that it would mean a decline of the dollar and so forth. And obviously that would be a problem for America. They are doing it very slowly, very cautiously, but they are getting rid of the US dollar and the treasury bonds at this time. And they are not, they're not just dumping it all at once. They are moving in a very slow, methodical method to get rid of this. And the United States realizes this. This is why they're demonizing China, actually any country that doesn't use a private Western central bank. And if you really look at it, you step back for a second and say, okay, which are those countries? It's North Korea, it's Iran, it's Syria, it's Russia, it's China, and if you look around, these are the countries that are always demonized because they are not selling the United States, they're not using the US dollar as the reserve currency to sell their natural resources. And everywhere China, and I'm not for China, I'm not for Russia, but if you really look at this, everywhere China goes, China is in Afghanistan, helping the Afghan people mine copper and help them build their infrastructure. United States is also in Afghanistan. They're growing poppies to sell opium across into different nations to create funds to pay for covert operations that the United States wouldn't normally not pay for. And they're also there to keep an eye on the Chinese, and of course, the central bankers want the natural resources in Afghanistan, and also Afghanistan is in a strategic location right next to Iran and right next to Russia. If we look now in the Middle East, we'll look at Egypt, we look at Saudi Arabia, and we can see they are now talking and making deals with China. China is making deals with North Korea. China is making deals with Iran. China is down in in Africa, in Sudan, in Central Africa, and they are pumping in billions of dollars into the infrastructure down there. And this is why we see that a war breaking out in Sudan, because right now the United States has a puppet government in Sudan, and China is backing the rebels in Sudan, and the United States is getting everyone out of there so they can maintain control of the oil fields, and we'll discuss that a little bit later here. Now, there are 3 warning signs that a financial crash is imminent. And I discussed this on Saturday, that billionaires start dumping their stocks. They start unloading at this point because as the bubble rises to the top, they have insider information, they know what's going on, and they realize, well, now is the time to take our profits and sell to the sucker who believes that the stock market is going to continually rise. And these are mostly retail investors who go in and say, hey, this is the time, man. It's continually rising and hasn't gone down in many, many years. This is it. I'm making a fortune. We see this happening in the housing market also. This happened during 2008. Beforehand, when people were flipping, they got everybody in to the real estate market. They're doing the same thing now with the real estate market. They're going back to ARMs, where adjustable rate mortgage, where people can go and get a lower interest rate because interest rates are going up. They're giving 100% financing, and most of the sales today are 60% cash. And those people are trying to unload their properties because they realize what is happening. Mortgage applications are plunging by 66%. Most of the mortgage corporations or departments have been laying off people since August. And we can see right now, if we go back to what I was talking about, I got a little sidetracked, that billionaires are starting to dump. Dumping means that the losses are acceptable, and the only purpose is that there is no hope of making a profit over the long term, and this is why they are starting to get out of it. Number 2, stock market at its lowest New Year opening since 2008. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had its worst day since November 7th, falling 135 points, and the week ending January 3rd was lower than the week's opening. The third, the bubble burst that makes 2008 look safe. United ICAP Chief Market Technician Walter Zimmerman recently sent a note to his clients outlining a small gain in the market, about 4% or around to 17,150 points, before the dam breaks in the market. His words of advice: based on our long-term cycles, the present stock market rally must be considered the bubble to end all bubbles. And we know this as a fact. If you look at this time and time again, since the Great Depression, we have been in a bubble, pop, bubble, pop, bubble, pop, and this has gone on for 100 years since the Fed has taken control. Now, we all understand when a government starts printing money, well, actually the Fed is printing money, they're really not the government, but the government is borrowing this money and producing treasury bonds. They need, and their debt continually rises, and it escalates so quickly that they can't cover the interest payments with the revenue that they're taking in. So what do they need to do? They need taxes. They need to go out across the ocean, find this money, and this is why they have FACTA. This is why they're going to all the banks across the country looking for those people who are avoiding paying taxes. This is why they have people who are working outside the United States but have a U.S. passport. They need to pay taxes at this time. They are looking for money everywhere. This is why Obamacare is here, because there are hidden taxes all throughout Obamacare. It is meant to raise money. This is why there's a penalty if you don't take Obamacare. And this is why when you do take Obamacare, there are taxes on the insurance policies that you take out. And they will continually push taxes on the people because they need to raise money. And right now, back in November, of course, the president was out there saying excessively high temperatures are already harming public health nationwide, and this is why on November 1st he created an executive order for climate change. Because what is he setting up here? Well, in his executive order on climate change, Obama warned that too much rain, not enough rain, also dictated that executive action against climate fluctuations. The impacts of climate change, including an increase in prolonged periods of excessively high temperatures, more heavy downpours and increased wildfires, more severe droughts, permafrost thawing, ocean acidification, and sea level rise are already affecting communities, natural resources, ecosystems, economies, public health across the nation. What's more, climate control requires action by the federal government as opposed to the federal government. And right now he is setting this up as we speak. Even though there's record cold temperatures across the country, he is setting this up for a carbon tax. They are going to tax each person on their carbon footprint, maybe on the miles that they drive, and we will definitely see this happen because they need to raise money, and they will make things up to raise money. It reminds me going all the way back to the Revolution when the kings just started to tax everything, and this is what every government does. France has imposed a 75% on those people who make $1 million or more. Right now, Spain is raiding the Social Security reserves in that country. These countries are going to raise more and more taxes on the people to make ends meet, because you know why? They have so much debt that it is not sustainable. When you have this much debt and double-digit employments all across the Eurozone and here in the United States, even though they're telling us it's 7%, which we know it's not true, because if it was true, real estate, retail would all take off naturally, because people would be making more money and people would want to spend this money. And this is how we know it is not true. Okay, now U.S. Senator Rand Paul is putting together a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit against the NSA, and he has more than 250 people that have joined already this lawsuit. I don't know where this lawsuit's going to go. And I say that we shouldn't be suing the government because that's going to come out of the taxpayer money. We should be suing each individual person who believes that the NSA is constitutional, because we, the people, decide what's constitutional and not constitutional. Not federal judges, not the government. And right now, you the government spying on me is against my Fourth Amendment right. So I believe that every single person should be held responsible in the lawsuit, not the government itself, because that is the taxpayer money. We should go after each single person and let them pay up from this lawsuit. And again, I don't know where this is going to go, so we'll have to watch this and see if this makes any headway at all. But if you'd like to join Paul encouraged Americans to join his suit through his Facebook page or the website of RANDPAC, his Political Action Committee. Now, we understand that the U.S. military is being purged at this time. Over 200 officers have been purged, and another U.S. general being purged by Obama, and U.S. Army Brigadier General Jeffrey A. Sinclair on Saturday was charged with sexual assault at the federal courthouse, and most of these generals are being brought up on different charges like gambling, sexual assault, and he is pleading not guilty. But we can see this is definitely a trend. One or two we'd say, okay, I see what's going on here, but over 200, it's getting to be a trend, and we see what the intentions are at this time. Now, the United Arab Emirates was purchasing a satellite from France, and they realized there were components in there that would enable America to spy and the French to spy on anyone. And they said, before this deal goes through, we want those components out, and we want to inspect it again. And this goes on to say, we have requested the French to change these components and also consulted with the Russian and Chinese firms. If this issue is not resolved, the UAE is willing to scrap the whole deal, said the source, adding that the incident has an increase in talks with Moscow along with Beijing, has also been a frequent defense tech supplier to the Gulf states. So what they're saying is, if you don't take this out, we'll just scrap it, and we might be looking at China and Russia to have them supply all our defense equipment. And we can see most of the Gulf states are starting to turn to China and Russia now, and they're moving away from the United States. Now, the NSA is admitting they are spying on members of the Congress. After, and I reported this, I believe this was Saturday, after Saturday, Bernie Sanders asked the NSA whether it spied on members of Congress. The NSA responded with this statement: NSA's authorities to collect signals, intelligence data include procedures that protect the privacy of U.S. persons. Such protections are built into and cut across the entire process. Members of Congress have the same privacy protections as all U.S. persons. NSA is fully committed to transparency with Congress. Our interaction with Congress has been extensive, both before and since the media disclosures began last June. In other words, yes, they are spying on the members of Congress because they are lumped in with all Americans. And the bigger question is, what are they doing with this information? Well, I'm going to tell you what they're doing with this information. They're looking for investment information. They're looking for information to blackmail certain government officials, and this is why the spying is going on right now. Now, the U.S. is trying to force Afghanistan to sign the security deal, and they want it signed now. Not in months, they want it signed now. And they, of course, they wanted it signed in 2013. Now we're heading into 2014, and they're getting a little antsy because they need for the troops to stay in Afghanistan because they're growing their poppy fields to pay for their covert missions. They do not want to hand over Afghanistan and let the Chinese come in and build up the infrastructure. They want to maintain the natural resources in this area, and it is a strategic location between Iran and Russia, and this is why they are never going to leave. And I've discussed this many, many times, that they cannot leave any of these countries that have these natural resources, and they are definitely going to stay. Now, the Chinese are combining their armed police under military control. The Chinese government is considering reorganizing the Chinese People Armed Police Force, PAP, and placing placing it under the direct control of the Central Military Commission of the Communist Party as part of the country's military realignment plan. By placing public security units under a single command, the Chinese hopes to respond to large-scale riots and other incidences more rapidly. They want to phase out PAP, and they're going to downsize it right now. And PAP usually, their personnel have turned out to protect the Japanese people when they've come under riots. And I think when war breaks out, they do not want this police force. They want it all under military control, and they will be able to control things much easier and lock down their country, just like the United States when war starts or when the president declares martial law. They have DHS to lock down the country, and this is why DHS was actually started, not to fight terrorism, because if you look at their website, they never have any type of warning about terrorists whatsoever, because they are using the DHS to spy on Americans, to keep them under control before, during, and after the collapse, and that's why they are there. Now, the U.S. is evacuating the diplomats from South Sudan. The Defense Department has overseen the evacuation of diplomatic and other staffers in South Sudanese capital of Juba. So far, close to 200 U.S. government staffers were flown out. And the United States has been one of the biggest supporters of South Sudan, which formally seceded from Sudan in 2011. The administration of President Barack Obama has allocated $300 million over the last year, as well as approved arms exports to Juba. And right now, Sudan, with the help of the U.S., are now deploying joint forces to protect the oil fields from the rebels, because, again, there's a puppet government that the United States controls in Sudan, and they're there for the natural resources. The central bankers are there to capture the natural resources. And on the other side, you have the Chinese, who are pumping in billions of dollars into northern African infrastructure, and they are, giving money and weapons to the rebels. Where it's the opposite in Syria, where the United States and the central bankers are paying the rebels and giving them arms to overthrow Assad. The only difference here is that the United States and the central bankers already have a puppet government in Sudan, so they're on the government side. In Syria, they have Assad, which is not part of the central bankers' U.S. government, puppet government. He's selling their natural resources, not using the U.S. dollar, and in Sudan they are selling the oil and their natural resources using the U.S. dollar. So you can see the difference and what is actually going on here. It's quite clear. Now, John Kerry was out there today saying no troops on the ground in U.S. In Iraq, and of course, whatever they say is always going to be the opposite. I mean, in Lebanon right now, they have sent troops down there for training, and this is how it always starts, because what's happening is the central bankers, U.S. government, are losing control over the Middle East right now. They lost control of Egypt, they're losing control of Saudi Arabia, they're looking at Russia and China, and they're trying to maintain control in Libya, Iraq, Yemen, by bombarding these people with drone attacks, because the Al-Qaeda that they're talking about are actually the people rising up against the puppet governments that the central bankers, U.S. government, have put into place there, and they want their countries back. And this is what's happening right now. And Iraq is having pretty much a civil war at this time, and the White House said on Monday that the United States is accelerating its military sales and deliveries to Iraq to help the country fight Al-Qaeda. Now, Al-Qaeda in Iraq right now, they're the bad guys, but Al-Qaeda in Syria are the good guys because they're fighting Assad. See how this works? And now they're sending funds down there, and Representative Adam I'm going to pronounce his name here, Kinzinger, said that they should assist with limited air power in Iraq to regain control of Iraq. And this is how it starts. They're going to send in limited air power. They're going to send in military forces to train the Iraqis again and help them out, send money, send military equipment, because they need to maintain control of the captured natural resources and keep selling it using the U.S. dollar. Now, if these rebels in Iraq who want their country back overthrow the puppet government, those resources would no longer be sold using the US dollar. And that each time this happens, the dollar weakens and weakens and weakens, and the other countries look at it and say, uh-oh, they're losing control of the petrodollar. We need to start getting rid of treasury bonds, stop using the US dollar for trade, and turn to other currencies. And this is why Australia has made a deal with China. This is why North Korea, Russia, United Kingdom, Iran, Syria, Brazil, you name it, India, they're all making deals, hedging their bets. Saudi Arabia, we can see it all happening right now. Okay, now almost half of U.S. national security leaders say cyber warfare is the most serious threat in 2014. And this goes on to say that 45.1% of respondents said cyber warfare is the greatest threat to the United States. And we understand why, because they've been building up the propaganda for two and a half years right now. Starting out, if you look at my timeline on the x22report.com site, you go up to the top where it says economic collapse. They started out showing that financial institutions were getting attacked. They started blaming it on Iran, they blamed it on Syria, they blamed it on North Korea, they blamed it on China, they blame it on Russia, and they built this propaganda up all throughout this time period. And then of course, we had drills about cyber attacks hitting the power infrastructure. We had drills about banks receiving and getting hit by cyber attacks, and this is all in preparation for the main event, which I've talked about many times, of the doomsday cyber attack that will take down the power grid, which will put the banks into a bank holiday, where then they will do bail-ins, and this will all be blamed on another country to avoid the U.S. government, the Fed, the central bankers, for being blamed for the collapse that is going to happen. And we can see that these cyber attacks are building. We saw Adobe get hit. We see Target getting hit. We see glitches in the NASDAQ. And, we see PNC Bank all of a sudden had a strange glitch where people had miscellaneous withdrawals, double mortgage payments, and we can see this is all starting to form right now. And now Yahoo has been hit by a huge malware attack, and they were reporting that 29,000 computers per hour were being affected by the Yahoo ads. When someone clicked on it or something, a malware would be downloaded to their computer, and it would be infected. Then you would go out and email someone else, and the infection would just spread and spread and spread. And they're just building the case, showing how easily people could be attacked, and this is building up the propaganda that this attack is actually going to come from another country, which we know it isn't. It is going to be a false flag event, and it'll probably most likely be with other type of smaller events, because they've been leading and letting us know that lone wolf groups can't handle a big attack, but they can do a small dirty nuke attack, they can do a chemical attack in this city, and they can do a major cyber attack from across the ocean. Now, Radware is providing the top network security predictions for 2014, and what they're saying are, here are the two main things that are going to happen in 2014. Surge in critical infrastructure outages. Advanced countries are more likely to experience widespread cyber attack disruptions to critical infrastructure services, including power generation, water supply, cellular, telephone, delivery services, and police or first responder networks. We're also going to see a rise in cyber hostage incidences. There has been a long history of cyber ransom activity. In 2014, they will break new ground whereby nefarious groups will take digital assets or services as hostage and commandeer these services until certain demands are met. We can see how this will play into the cyber attack from another country or from Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group, where they can say, we've taken control of the financial institutions, we are holding your financial system hostage until you do a certain number of things, and we can see how this is all playing out. Now, over the weekend, there was another warning To all Americans in Lebanon, a high probability of terrorist attacks in this area, and they're warning all U.S. citizens not to travel to Lebanon because what's happening in Lebanon? Well, they're losing control, and they've sent troops over there to help train the Lebanese people, and we're seeing this in Lebanon, we're seeing this in Libya, we're seeing this in Iraq, and pretty soon there'll be travel advisories for all of these countries because the United States central bankers are losing control, and they are now need to send reinforcements to maintain control at this time. And this goes on to say that the message warns that these sites are likely targets for terrorist attacks for at least the near term. The embassy also urged all American citizens to avoid all travel to Lebanon due to safety and security concerns. Just like in Sudan, they were, getting all the U.S. Staffers out of there. Same thing in Lebanon. We had that during the summer before the Syrian false flag, they had a big blanket terrorist alert because they're basically losing control all in this region, and they're trying to maintain it, and getting the people out so they don't see what they're doing is the easiest way to do this. Now, there was a report saying that terrorism is going to spread like a virus, and it will spread to the U.S. The Western-backed terrorism in Afghanistan and Iraq will spread to the rest of the world. This virus, terrorism, will not stay in place. It was produced and fostered, and the first opportunity it gets, it will spread everywhere. The U.S. cannot claim it has kept its geography immune from the threat of terrorists because the bodies of the American soldiers that are delivered to their families are the result of seed planted by extremist U.S. governments in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we've heard our representatives say this, that all these people coming back from fighting in these places, these are going to be the domestic terrorists. They've been radicalized, and we are going to see terrorism spread throughout the country. And this is why they're building us up, telling us that it's going to be lone wolf groups, it's going to be domestic terrorism, and they're just building us up for this false flag that is coming. Now, the FBI has just changed its official function from law enforcement to national security. One analyst called it a rebranding of the organization, adding that there are benefits when linking to national security issues. For example, it can open doors to more funding. It estimated that between 2001 and 2009, the FBI doubled the amount of agents dedicated to counterterrorism. So by changing the name, they can add more and more offices. But the question is, now we have the FBI that is securing national security and doing counterterrorism. We have DHS doing the same thing. Now we have two departments doing the same thing. How much you want to bet they combine these departments to build up the amount of soldiers that they need to maintain control of the United States? Because now we have both doing the exact same thing. And this just so happened to come out when a colonel in the U.S. Army who's retired, Harry G. Riley, Colonel, U.S. Army, he retired in 1992, is putting together a march on D.C. And what he's calling for is to replace the United States government peacefully. And he goes on to say, and he broke this down into different phases. Phase 1. Field millions, as many as 10 million patriots who will assemble in a peaceful, nonviolent, physically unarmed display of unanswering loyalty to the U.S. Constitution against the incumbent government leadership in Washington, D.C., with the mission to bring down the existing leadership. This is Phase 1. Phase 2. 1 million or more of the assembled 10 million must be prepared to stay in D.C. as long as it takes to see Obama, Biden, Reid, McDonald, Bonner, Pelosi, and Attorney General Holder removed from office. The senior Republican in the U.S. House of Representatives will become Speaker of the House, and the U.S. House of Representatives will elect a temporary President and Vice President of the United States. The U.S. Senate will take action to elect a new majority and minority leader. As required, the U.S. Congress will execute appropriate legislation to convene new elections, or U.S. states will appoint replacements for positions vacated consistent with the established constitutional requirements. Phase 3. Those with the principles of West Cruz, Dr. Ben Carson, Lee DeMint, Paul, Governor Walker, Sessions, Gowdy, Jordan will compromise a tribunal, assume positions of authority to convene investigations, recommend appropriate charges against politicians and government employees to the new U.S. Attorney General appointed by the new president. All actions in Phase 2 and 3 will be consistent with the U.S. government. He goes on to say he has no political agenda. He does not want to be appointed to a political office. He is gathering more and more military men to go along with this. This is scheduled for May 16th, 2014. It is called Operation American Spring. And he goes on to say, we must appeal to 10 million and more American patriots to come and stay in Washington, D.C. to stop the White House and Congress from total destruction of the United States. It's now or never. God help us. We see no reasonable, hopeful sign that indicates there are honorable, loyal, mature, critical thinking, experienced people in government that understands the chaos about to rain down on America. Nor do they care. Our only hope is that we, the people, call, organize, and draw a few million patriots to stay in D.C. for an American spring. We can see what is happening right now. Of course, Obama administration, the White House people, they understand what is happening now. We understand that the Fed did this tapering, which is really not a taper. I mean, it's so minuscule, it's meaningless. And they understand that they can't taper anymore. As the unemployment rate drops, they have to move to a full-on taper, and they understand that this will collapse the entire economy. There's just no way around it. So right now, to make it look good, they started to taper. Right now, we can see that the United States has been pivoting to Asia, setting up bases, building military bases. They've kept everything in place, the missile shield in Europe. They started the peace talks with Iran, which will not end well. And we can see what is happening right now. They're going to need a way out. They're going to need to do something before this happens, because even without this American spring, they still needed some type of event to blame this collapse on another country. Now with this American spring, it puts in an additional problem for the Obama administration. Because if, for instance, there are 1 million or 5 million or 10 million people outside sitting there asking for Obama to resign and all the other leaders to resign, they are not going to go quietly. They will not let this happen. What they will do beforehand, and if they see this building, which I believe it's going to, what's going to happen is they are going to do some type of an event here in the United States to declare martial law. And we can see that all of this is going to play into this event, because it'd be very easy for them to knock out the power. It'd be very easy for them to cyber attack the banks, have them closed down. It'd be very easy for them then to declare martial law. And I've talked about this many, many times in my other reports, that the doomsday cyber attack coupled with a dirty nuke, or coupled with a chemical weapons attack, because we have to think back that CNN has already leaked it out that they have intel that Assad has been saving a cache of chemical weapons that the UN inspectors don't even know about. We already understand that Iran, the propaganda is out there saying that they can create a dirty nuke at any time. We understand that they've been demonizing China because China is looking to become the next reserve currency of the world, and we can see how this is all playing, and also they're demonizing North Korea. And we can see what is happening at this point and how all of this is playing into. The government just ordered potassium iodide pills for radiation. Is this for Fukushima? Is this for a dirty nuke? We don't know. We can see how this is all now starting to play in. The go date is in May. We have the debt ceiling coming up very soon. We have, I believe the government said that they have up until the first week of February, and then they'd have to take extraordinary measures to keep the government operating. They can't stop spending. They need to borrow more and more. The Fed cannot stop printing money, creating money. So this will never ever end. The only way it will end, and we've been hearing this from many, many people, is a collapse. The people of America are already collapsing. The only thing that everyone is waiting for is the markets to come down to show that there's a problem. It's almost like in 2008. Beforehand, there were problems. The real estate market was collapsing. Unemployment was going up. But nothing really happened until the market started to come down. Then people woke up, and this is their illusion. They keep the market pumped up to keep the illusion to the very last minute, and this is what they do. And we can see that this is all starting to form, to fit in together, and we can see what is happening. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.